I'd always felt like there was something that was just different about me. What ended up filling the void of Christ was transgender ideology. I ended up going under the knife at 15 years old to remove both of my breasts. It also had hit me very quickly after that. I was going to have to start thinking about what my adult life would look like. I've been chasing something that doesn't exist for a huge chunk of my life. I was grieving my breasts in the last few years of my life and how much I just wanted to live a normal life as a woman again.
In this journey, after you detransitioned, you had a spiritual awakening.
Eventually, God revealed himself to me. The more that I looked at my own life in the context of the Bible, in the context of Christ's life, the more that everything started to come together.
I want to welcome Chloe Cole to One Nation Under God, a podcast here on NewsNation where we put a spotlight on conversations and headlines with faith at the center. Chloe, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Chloe, you describe yourself as a detrans woman on a mission, and you now dedicate your life to speaking about your experience as a person who transitioned into a boy and changed your mind and decided to reverse course. And along the way, you found your faith. So we just want to start with your story a little bit. At age 13, you were put on puberty blockers. By age 15, you had surgery and had a double mastectomy. But by age 16, you say that you were misled and you decided to reverse course. So, can you just take us through your story?
Yes, so in my earlier formative years, before I had even questioned um, that part of myself, before I started thinking about my body in terms of my femininity and my discomfort around it, I had always kind of been on the tomboyish side. And I'd always felt like there was something that was just different about me that separated me from my peers, even from my own family. It later turned out that I had a learning disability, and throughout a lot of my childhood, I was not only dealing with that and the effects of that on me emotionally and socially, but also um, I was born with a birth defect, and that I had to get treatment for throughout a lot of my formative years. And I was just so used to this idea that there was just something off about me. And for a lot of my childhood, I was just searching for what that meant, and what my meaning and my purpose in this world would be. And I having been raised in a home that wasn't particularly Christ-centered, I feel like that ended up being the biggest missing piece of my story, but that was something that I didn't know about until much later in my life. What ended up filling the void of Christ was transgender ideology. I thought that because I didn't like the way that my body looked as a woman, because I didn't like going through the discomfort of female puberty, and because I didn't understand that these were normal and beautiful experiences, that I was actually destined to be a young man. And that explained away all of this discomfort, all these feelings of not aligning with my peers or even with my own sense of self. And at 12 years old, I decided that I was going to live the lifestyle of a young man from that point on.
And so, Chloe, you took this revelation to your parents, and what was their reaction? And then, how did you get from there to actually taking to your doctor and taking serious medical interventions?
My mom and dad were very shocked. They knew that I was a tomboyish girl, but they never expected to hear their own daughter say, "I'm not your daughter anymore. I'm your son, and I don't like the way that I was born." I think that's a very painful message for any parent to hear, but I think all things considered, my mom and dad handled it very well, very sensibly, and they decided that because they didn't really know what to do about this, that it probably would be best to send me to a counselor in hopes that they would help discover maybe where these feelings are coming from and to explore them a little bit before jumping into any big changes, especially ones that would govern my body and my physical and reproductive developments. Because they knew that I wasn't their son. They knew that I was not transgender, and they could see very plainly that I was struggling with something. They didn't know what. But all of these expectations they had were just completely thrown away when we started seeing this psychologist who separated us from one another, so they weren't allowed to be involved in these discussions that I was having, and so they weren't properly informed. And without proper information around what I was going through and what I was saying to these other adults, they were not empowered to help me. So they became very frustrated, rightfully so, and when they talked to the doctors themselves, they were fed several lies. One being that this was not a phase for me, that this is something that I could not help. It was an inborn condition, that children already know what they want, what their identity is, who they are, and their sense of gender from as early as toddlerhood. But perhaps the biggest and the most evil lie that they were told by these medical professionals was that I was at risk of suicide, and I was very likely to end my life if I weren't given early enough medical intervention. And this wasn't something that was just said to them once. They were told at multiple steps of the way, if you don't give your transgender son the medical treatment that he needs early enough in his life, you may not even have a child anymore. And no parent wants to face that. No parent ever wants to receive that kind of ultimatum from the doctors of their child, no less. And so I don't blame my mom and dad for saying yes, because they weren't given any other information. They weren't told that it was in fact a phase, that I likely would end up growing out of it and become comfortable with myself as a woman, as an adult. We weren't afforded that chance as a family for me to live the rest of my adolescence normally and healthily.
So, at what point did you decide that you had made a mistake and you wanted to reverse course?
That didn't happen until after I had surgery. So, very, very quickly, I was put on Lupron to suppress my puberty. I was put on testosterone to masculinize my face, my voice, every single part of me. At 13 years old, before I had even finished my 8th grade year of middle school. And so, because of how powerful these drugs were, I really did look like a young man. And I went through pretty much my entire high school career being seen by every single one of my peers, being seen by my teachers and the school staff as really like any other young boy. They had no idea. But the major turning point in my transition ended up being the surgery. I ended up going under the knife at 15 years old to remove both of my breasts, and this was the most perhaps impactful part of it in the worst possible way. It was healthy parts of my body just being removed forever, and a part of my sexuality and my self as an adult, as a woman, just ripped away permanently. And having to deal with not only the post-op process and the healing psychologically and emotionally, I it also had hit me very, very quickly after that, that I was going to have to start thinking about what my adult life would look like. Not just in terms of what I wanted to do after high school, but also all of this was happening before I had a driver's license, before I had even driven a car, before I had a first relationship or a first kiss. And for it to come at me so quickly and for me to then realize that, wait, but one day when I'm an adult, I want to have children of my own. I want to be able to get pregnant and give birth and be in a healthy traditional relationship where I'm fulfilling the natural feminine role, was what led me to realizing every single part of this is a mistake. I've been chasing something that doesn't exist for a huge chunk of my life up until that point. and I can't keep going on like this. I have to find I didn't know what my future was going to look like from that point on because I was 16 years old and I was so lost, but I knew that I had to choose life as a woman again.
And did you go to your doctor first? Did you go to your parents? And once you actually spoke with your medical team, what was their reaction?
I first went to my mom and some friends of mine just crying and breaking down one night about how much I was grieving my breasts in the last few years of my life and how much I just wanted to live a normal life as a woman again. And after that, I started scheduling appointments with my doctors, the ones who had put me through this process in the first place. And every single one was just completely unsuccessful, completely unhelpful. When I came back to the woman who referred me to surgery, the psychologist, I detailed all the regret that I was going through. And she told me, well, this is just another transition. Maybe you're still transgender. Maybe you're just non binary. It's just a continuation of your gender journey, which is a complete slap in the face to everything that I was going through with not only the physical complications, but all of the emotional loss. And when the next doctor I saw was my endocrinologist who had put me on the hormones and the puberty blockers. She couldn't answer to me when I asked what the long-term effects might be of these drugs, whether my body would be able to recover again, whether I would have healthy hormonal levels, or if I'd be able to conceive children after starting these treatments at such a young age. And I asked her for very simple tasks like scheduling regular blood tests. And once I get the results back, sending me a chart for women so that I could compare myself to other healthy women my age. Simple requests like that were being denied. I kept being given my test results back for with charts for adult men. They wouldn't even change my sex marker or my name back to my birth name or my birth sex in the files. I still get letters back from Kaiser, which was my healthcare provider, referring to me as a young man. And I learned the hard way that within the medical community, within the healthcare system, there is no acknowledgement of the other side of the transgender experience of those people like me, the thousands who have been hurt by these treatments, who have gone permanently sterile, who are trying to find their way back to living a normal life. There's no mention of detransition in any of the standards of care for transgender patients or even regret. It's all focused on one side of the story and pushing further and further and further until you can't go back.
That must have taken a lot of courage to tell your parents and your medical team that you decided you had made a mistake. Was it a hard conversation, or was it just natural? Were you just sharing your feelings?
It was one of the most difficult conversations to have in my life, actually. More so, more so speaking to my parents and the doctors. I throughout most of my childhood, my adolescence, I didn't really have the closest relationship with my mom and dad, and even though I loved them very much, and even though I knew that they loved me just the same, I just had a difficult time communicating and mustering up the courage to talk to them about very intimate details of my life and some of my personal struggles. I don't know why, I just felt from early in my childhood that I had to prove to them that I was tough, that I was strong, that I was independent. Um, Emotionally and in terms of my physical needs. But, I mean, coming out to them, telling them that I was a boy when I was 13 was a huge leap for me, but to go back and tell them that this thing that we were suffering through together as a family was seemingly for nothing, that those 3, 4 years of my life that they were raising me as their son ended up being a failure, I felt so much guilt. I hated telling them that. I called my mom because I didn't want to face her while I was crying. I didn't want her to see the tears in my eyes that night. And our relationship during the period of my transition was something that at first got better as I ostensibly became more social and more comfortable with myself on the outside. But as I really started to suffer the ill effects of it psychologically and physically, my entire life, my relationship with everybody and everything around me just deteriorated. I was afraid that I mean, everybody in my life, and my mom and dad especially were afraid that I might not ever be able to come back from this. I was spiraling, I wasn't paying attention to my grades or school anymore. I ended up dropping out of school my senior year because I was in such a deep depression. They didn't know if I was ever going to become a happy, successful adult, but they stood there by my side. They let me know that they loved me just the same, and they stood up for me in even the littlest of ways. And because of that, I ended up becoming the woman who I am today, and if it weren't for the love of my mom and dad alongside me, I don't think I'd be where I'm at today.
Wow, that's beautiful. So you mentioned Kaiser, your healthcare provider, where you were a patient. In 2023, you filed a lawsuit against Kaiser Permanente, which is one of California's largest healthcare providers, for alleged medical negligence. You said that they did not provide you or make you properly aware of the risks that you were taking, and also alternative treatment. You also say that um, they, caused you, or they used emotionally manipulative language. I think, for example, saying things like, what would you do if, or would you want a dead daughter to your parents? And also, you say that you still suffer medical complications to this day. So, joint pain, urinary tract infections, and of course, emotional harm. Kaiser, just at the end of July, announced that they are halting gender surgeries for individuals under age 19. What's your reaction to this, first of all? And then, secondly, I'd like to ask you about, there's been a lot of criticism from lawmakers in the California legislature, some of them calling it cruel. What would you respond to them?
I think the fact that we're doing these treatments in the first place, that this experimentation on children has gone on for this long, for decades in our country, is what's actually cruel. Denying these children the right to growing up with healthy bodies that are fully intact, with the ability to experience parts of adulthood, such as sexual pleasure and the ability to have one's own children one day, is it's a crime. And it's a crime in our country that has been widespread for far too long. And it's about time that we start to stop it. I think the fact that Kaiser is rolling out nationwide this pause on these surgeries in children is a sign of a massive cultural change. And I think that very obviously it's in response to the executive orders that Trump has been issuing in the last year, as well as potentially the lawsuits that have been popping up from children who have been directly harmed by them against them. But unfortunately, a pause is not enough because it's just that, a pause. They could very easily reverse that decision with a new administration that is run by a Democrat, or if any of these executive orders get struck down or don't become laws. They don't intend to permanently stop these procedures. They want to continue going because Kaiser, like many other major healthcare providers in the country, are completely ideologically captured, and they want to continue profiting off of vulnerable children like me. We need to make it so that this practice, whether it be the usage of puberty blockers, whether it be the usage of cross-sex hormones, and especially any form of surgery in gender-confused children, is banned not just in all 50 states, but also federally, and to ensure that this is a plague that completely disappears from our hospital systems and from our culture.
President Trump's executive order, which he signed in January of 2025, it prohibits gender treatment, specifically puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and surgeries for individuals under 19. And he's doing that via federal funding mechanisms. So essentially, cutting funding for these hospitals. Um, do you believe that, obviously Kaiser's not the only one, Children's Hospital Los Angeles, Stanford Medicine, and dozens of other major hospitals across the country are pausing their programs. So, do you believe that it is just a temporary thing, or do you actually feel that there is, or see that there is a sea change in the medical profession, and a different approach, and sort of an allowance for different approaches to children who experience gender dysphoria?
I think for now it is a temporary measure, but it's up to us to continue the momentum of the changes happening and make it so that, especially when it comes to the children who are suffering from this confusion around their identities, that they get the chance to grow up with a healthy body without being experimented on, while also having having where these feelings are really coming from explored, and teaching them ways of coping with that while they're children, and going into adulthood that don't involve cutting off or mutilating healthy parts of their bodies and rejecting who God beautifully made them to be. And I think that is a major missing part of the conversation around this from both sides. There, of course, is a huge push from the conservative side to ban these treatments entirely, which I think is a step in the right direction. But if we're going to get rid of this treatment, we have to supplement it with something else. And I think what that looks like is following in something akin to the historical model that has been used for children experiencing this confusion, this distress around their sexual identity. I think that we should, again, be giving them psychological healthcare first before even thinking about things like gender identity. Because ultimately, when you look at a lot the history, the personal history of a lot of these children, many of them are highly traumatized in some way. Many of them have an unhealthy relationship with either one of their parental figures or with their family. Many of them have been abused, neglected, or they have some other sort of psychological condition. And more often than not, once you discover that, it becomes very clear to figure out where this confusion around their gender is coming from.
So in this journey, after you detransitioned, you had a spiritual awakening. Can you tell us about that experience and how it's impacted your work?
I think that's the single biggest part of my testimony, actually. I didn't for years up until this point in my life, I was struggling to find a sense of purpose and also orienting myself just morally and ethically and trying to figure out how to conduct myself in the world. As I said earlier, I did not really grow up in a particularly Christ-oriented home. My mom and dad, even though they were raised Christian, um, we stopped going to church as a family when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and I never really fully understood why we went to church in the first place, but also why they stopped. And that ended up being a very big hole in my life spiritually, in my heart, in my soul. And what ended up filling that void where God should have been was my transgender identity. It sort of gave me the chance to be the God of my own life, where I could just basically bend reality to my will. I could be whoever I wanted, I could do whatever I wanted, I could even be a member of the opposite sex. I could do the impossible. But by chasing what only I wanted rather than God's will, by living a lie every day, I was actually destroying myself and my life in the process and hurting the other people around me too. When it came time for me to stop transitioning, that hole was there again because the entire premise of my transition pretty much my entire belief system in my life up until that point was completely shattered. It was all a complete scam. And so I didn't immediately get better the moment that I stopped transitioning. And in a lot of ways, I started getting worse. Just, I gave up on life completely. I gave up on my responsibilities. I started chasing pleasure. I started chasing um, consumerism, buying as many clothes as possible, experimenting with substances, and just failing out of pretty much every part of my life. But around this point in my life, I also started to have a lot of Christian men and women enter my world as well. And it initially I didn't think that my detransition was anything that had any sort of spirituality or God tied to it. But eventually God revealed himself to me through the kindness and the love of the people around me who um, loved me in a way that was very unique that I had never really experienced before. They not only were unconditionally there for me, showing me that they cared for me, no matter what I looked like, no matter what stage of my life I was at, no matter what I was suffering through, but they also helped me to get better. They held me to a higher standard. They held me to a standard of good character, and eventually they had me asking questions about myself that I never had asked before, primarily about my faith. And the more that I looked at my own life in the context of the Bible, in the context of Christ's life, the more that everything started to come together and make more sense. And I started to recontextualize the events in my life up until that point in a much different light. Before, I didn't know if there was a God out there, but I thought if there was, he must absolutely hate me. I must have been created for wrath. I must have been created to be hated, to suffer. But I learned no. Everything that I was going through, I was suffering not because God was making me suffer. It was at my own hands. It was because I was rejecting his creation. I was rejecting the beautiful way that he created humanity and trying to run away from my responsibilities, not only in my daily life, but also my spiritual responsibilities. And he let me suffer, not because I deserved to be in pain, not because he wanted me to, but because he knew that through him, I would be able to pick the pieces of my life back up. I would be able to repurpose all of the pain that I went through and be able to use it to help the world and the people around me, to help other children, other young men and women, other families who are suffering. Maybe not necessarily with gender, but with different kinds of confusion in their lives through my testimony. And ultimately, it's through accepting the onus of that, the responsibility of that, and picking up my life and using my testimony that has given me the most purpose that I have ever had. And even just through that act of saying yes, I've gone through a complete transformation in my life in every single way. Physically, in terms of my health, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. I've been transformed.
So faith has really been a key element in your healing and finding new purpose and your journey going forward.
Yes, and I think stories like mine speak to the fact that no matter what you've been through, you could be addicted to drugs. You could literally lose parts of your body and still be whole through God, and you never Nobody ever is irredeemable.
And in your work now, what do you say to families and adolescents who are going through this are dealing with this issue, and maybe adolescents who say, "No, this is what I want to do," or parents who say, "No, I have to defend. This is what my child tells me. I have to defend them. I have to do what I have to. If they tell me that they want to change their gender, I have to help them do that."
A lot of people are very prone to getting angry at not just the children and the young people who are confused and think that they are the opposite sex, but especially at the parents who give in to the pressure and think that by affirming and by allowing their children and encouraging them to undergo this course of treatment and this unhealthy way of life, um, that it's the right thing to do. But I think if anything, we should have a lot of grace for these confused young men and women and for their families because my mom and dad were once in that position. And what I've learned from that is that it's not easy to be in the middle of. It's not easy when you have doctors, entire institutions telling you that by following reality, you're going to hurt your child and lead to their death. My mom and dad certainly believed that when that lie was being shoved down their throat. We need to have forgiveness for these parents who give in and say yes. But we also need to be the ones to say, no, this is not the answer for your child, and point at stories like mine, point out what is happening in hospital systems, the harms that this actually does to the body, and say, not only that, this might actually be what kills your child, but also that there's a way out, that your child can learn to deal with their discomfort that often is you can just chalk up to normal adolescent feelings of distress and fear around growing up. But on the flip side, for the parents who don't give in, it's often a huge upward battle, and for many of them, it can seem like it's incredibly hopeless, especially if their child has already gone to adulthood or if they've already had custody ripped away from them or their child already is on these treatments. You can't help but wonder, like, how ever am I going to help my kid out of this? I mean, even Elon Musk, who is dealing with this with one of his own children right now, who is struggling with confusion around his sex and going through the transition process as a young man now. He thinks that he refers to his own son as being dead. He doesn't believe that he can bring his child back, but my mom and dad and a lot of my family, the people around me, thought the very same thing about me. But here I am today. I really What I want to share with parents and people who are questioning their transition and struggling with regret is that there's hope. There's a way out, and it's not going to be the easiest thing in the world, but there's a way out of this for everyone.
Do you think now that more detransitioners are becoming vocal? Um, do you feel like the medical community and just the advocacy community in general are listening to your voices? Are your voices being heard?
I think now more than ever, you just I mean, there's no way to ignore the stories of people like me, the detransitioners, the boys and girls, the men and women who have been through this process, and many of us permanently harmed by it. Now, there's still while there has been a lot of cultural and legislative change within the medical community, there still is a lot of work on our hands, and there's still no standards of care for those of us who detransition. There's no acknowledgement of any way out of going off of these treatments and continuing with a normal lifestyle, and there's not really any information on how any of these treatments affect the body long term. We need a lot more studies. We need to figure out how to healthily and properly detransition patients and help to counsel them through the trauma that transitioning has caused for many of us. And also, We need the medical community needs to take preventive measures. There needs to be an absolute stop to the use of these procedures in in patients under the age of 18, and a lot more caution in general around putting anybody through it.
Speaking of which, I wanted to get your take on what some European countries have done. You know, of course, the UK in 2022, they they commissioned a study to look at their Tavistock, which is the national gender identity development service in the UK, and it has they basically the study found that there's low no law there was a lack of evidence for the long term outcomes of interventions such as puberty blockers, etc. And they closed down that center. Other countries in Europe, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands have all done the same. And while they haven't banned, there are no sweeping bans there, they have all adopted more cautious and multidisciplinary approaches to this issue. So in the United States, I mean, there has never been a study on just the long term effects of puberty blockers and hormones on people under the age of 18. Have we not had the same type of research done in the United States, which is a pioneer in medical research?
No, we haven't really examined how these treatments affect people long term, and especially children going into their adult years. But from the information that we do have already, it's very it's very it's very dark. It's very sinister. We already know that children placed onto puberty blockers, and um, a major transgender surgeon, Dr. Marcy Bowers, has even admitted that when you place children on the puberty blocking drugs before a certain stage of puberty, no matter whether you put them on hormones afterward or if you take them off these treatments, they're never going to be able to fully develop sexually. They're never going to be able to have full sexual function in their adult lives. They'll never be able to achieve um, orgasm or have children of their own, even once they hit adulthood. And those are major developmental milestones that are missing in a child's life forever.
Well, you've taken a really strong stand, and I imagine that you also receive a lot of criticism and hate. I mean, recently the Southern Poverty Law Center included you on their hate watch as a far right extremist for speaking about your experience as a detransitioner. They also say that you're anti LGBTQ. What's your response, and how do you handle all the negative criticism?
If anything, I take it as a badge of honor. They've been a fraudulent organization for decades. So if I'm hated by them, then I think that's a good thing. But their claims are completely untrue. I don't think I'm pretty far from far right, but I think more than anything I've been right so far about the abuses that have been happening in our country to our children. And there's nothing hateful about speaking in favor of the rights of children to be loved the way that God beautifully made them, and to grow up without being experimented on by predatory hospital systems. And I'm not anti anything. I love these people as they are, and I think they deserve the right. They deserve to be treated with the same compassion as everybody else. But by ripping apart their bodies, by taking away the health of people at an early age, we're denying them of their basic human rights.
So you said that faith was really a key, really marked like a turning point in your journey, in your healing, in just finding joy again. Can you tell us a little bit about how faith plays a role in your life now and how it informs your mission going forward?
It's been a massive part of my life since I have become a Christian. It's something that's really given me a backbone to everything that I'm doing. It's given me a foundation to how I should carry myself in my daily life and in my profession. And also something that gives me a lot of hope. and a lot of healing going forward. I think a lot of my personal favorite verses in the Bible come straight from the first letter of Corinthians, um, which, even though it's not a book, it's still something that is very theologically rich and has informs a lot of what I do. And I think my absolute favorite verse is I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it's along the lines of everything you do, do it with love. I also was reading through that same letter a few months ago, just looking through it, and one thing that had really hit me then was I don't remember the exact verse, but it was around circumcision and how it doesn't matter whether a man is circumcised or not, as long as he follows the commandments. And even though it was specifically about circumcision, about the old covenant, I couldn't help but think about my own experience and how parts of my body are permanently gone. They are no longer with me. And when I was reading, it was at a point in time where I was really questioning whether I might want to go through with a reconstruction of my breasts, whether I wanted to go through with surgery to get implants. And that was something that I've been wrestling with for a very long time. But upon reading this, it was a good reminder that it doesn't matter how I look. It doesn't matter that the scars are still there, no that there's nothing really there anymore. It doesn't even matter that my body isn't whole anymore because through Christ, I'm still whole. And so, reading through the Bible and staying true to my faith, even in just little ways like this, it keeps me going. It keeps me healing in every single part of my life.
And Chloe, you recently turned 21. So tell us, what are your plans for the future? What do you hope to be doing in the next few years?
It's so disorienting because, I mean, before I started speaking publicly, I was in a very dark period of my life. I wasn't even sure if I would make it to 18 years old, and here I am now. I've made it to 21. I've made it through several huge milestones, and in term like, in terms of my future, my with my career, I'm not really sure exactly where I want to go, but I like being I've learned that I do like being in public. I love getting to speak and to connect with so many different people, and it really seems like the sky is the limit here. But I think more importantly, in terms of my personal life, I have really solid goals of one day getting married. I wanna I want a husband, I want to become a wife, and I hope to have healthy children and a big family of my own one day, more than anything. I want to live in a happy, healthy, warm home.
And do you feel like you've been able to engage in civil dialogue with people who don't agree with you, or, people who think you are, just you're, for example, people who, are labeling you a far right extremist, for example. Has there been civil dialogue?
In the midst of all the craziness, I've actually managed to get quite a bit of civil dialogue. Now, I knew from the very beginning of speaking out that by doing so, it would cost me a lot of my friendships, especially those in the transgender community. I would be severing a lot of ties, and that a lot more angry people would come my way, and that certainly has been true. Um, Online, people often get mad at me just for speaking the truth, just for speaking about the abuses that I have experienced and that I still continue to see this day. Um, a lot of activists, a lot of angry transgender people will go out of their way to harass me, to say awful things to me, even go as far as to dox me and my family. Thankfully, nothing has really come of that, and overall, I've been able to stay out of harm's way very well. But I also have had a lot of people on the other side of things who may not necessarily agree with me on the subject have civil discussions with me and treat me very respectfully. And it's been it's been beautiful to be able to see that, to see these people step out of risk their friendships within their own communities to say, even if we don't completely agree on things, I respect you and you deserve to be able to speak and to be able to meet them where they're at. It's been an experience that's just it's incredible. And even in dealing with the detractors, the people who get angry and sometimes even violence, I'm grateful that I have my faith and the word of God to remind me that even with these people, I can be patient and I should be patient and I should give them some degree of grace because many of them are suffering just the same that I was in the years before.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Chloe, for joining us here on One Nation Under God. We are so grateful.
Thank you so much and God bless you.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.